Welcome to the second day of the Tobie Sewalong. So we're going to start off today by doing the patch pockets for view B. If you are not sewing view B, you can go ahead and you can skip ahead to the 11-minute mark. These patch pockets are not regular patch pockets. They have two entries, one for the top and one for the side. These are separate entries, and so it's a little bit more complicated than that. So the first thing that I like to do is just to kind of assess the orientation of all of my pattern pieces. So first, double check your notches. The notches go on the side of each of the patch pockets, and then also the spacing is different. It's slightly smaller on the top versus the bottom of each of the pockets. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mark the wrong side and an arrow pointing up on all of my patch pocket pieces. This includes the two mains, and it also includes the lining pieces. Now you want a matching pair for each pocket, so make sure that they are a pair and not identical to each other for each of the pockets. So once again, I'm going to mark all of these on the wrong side, checking my notch placement, just making sure that I have a pair of lining pieces and a main for each side, and kind of differentiating between the left and the right pocket. And now I'm going to be making the right patch pocket here for, the visuals, but you're going to do everything that we do for the right pocket to the left pocket as well. So once again, I have everything here for the right pocket. I have my two lining pieces, and then I also have my main pattern pieces. Once again, I am checking the pocket placement, making sure that I know the orientation and I know where my notches are. This is just going to make it go a lot smoother. With right sides touching, I'm going to line up the top edges of the main patch pocket and one of those patch pocket linings, pinning, and then we're going to stitch along that upper edge. So making sure, once again, that those notches all match up before we do that. And then we're going to take that second patch pocket lining and we are going to fold down the seam allowance, which is 1/2 inch, along the top edge with wrong sides touching. I'm just kind of guesstimating, but you can measure if you prefer. Open up those pieces that you sewed before, and you're going to slip the folded patch pocket lining into the middle so that that top folded edge lines up with the seam line that you made. And make sure that the right sides of the two linings are facing one another. Okay, once that is sandwiched in the middle, we are going to pin and stitch along that side seam. This is the seam with the notches, and you are going to sew through all of those layers at a normal 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, this is what it should look like now. It's kind of like a little piece of origami here. There is the seam along the top and then also that side. We're going to go ahead and trim down those seam allowances depending on how thick your fabric is. Kind of depends on how much you want to do that. But you do especially want to go ahead and trim down that corner just so that it can turn easily and you can get a nice point. Now once that is all trimmed, you're going to turn that corner right side out. The easiest way to do that is actually just to pull that middle lining away from the rest of the pocket, and that is going to turn that corner, and then you're going to give everything a nice little press, making sure once again that that corner is nice and sharp. And then once those edges are pressed, you're going to take that middle lining and then you are going to pull that around to the back of the pocket and then give that a little press as well. And then you do want to make sure that none of that lining is peeking out on that side little edge there, because this is going to be the right side of your pocket. So now that that seam is done, that is what will be visible once you sew down your pocket. Go ahead and line up the remaining raw edges at the side and the bottom, and we're going to sew that at a 1/2 inch seam allowance through all of the layers. Okay, now that is sewn, we are going to trim down those seam allowances to about in half, so about 1/4 of an inch, and we're also going to finish them. So this is the only place in the whole pattern that we are finishing our seam allowances. That's because this is going to be the inside of one of the pocket openings. So I like to just serge it, that way I can both trim and finish it in one step. Okay, and this is where we should be now. So we are going to do a little bit of edge stitching on the side. So this is the side that is finished, the one that had the notches. You might want to just grab your pattern piece and put those notch markings kind of back on, just with something that is going to disappear. But we're going to do a little bit of top stitching from one notch to the other, just about 1/8 of an inch in from the edge, and just back stitch at both ends. Okay, and that's what that top stitching should look like. Flip your pocket over, and then you are going to fold in the raw edge seam allowances just along that stitching line that you made. And so you're doing that on both the bottom and then the inside edge. Go ahead and press and steam those pretty well. And then now we get to attach this to our front. Now I like to use a glue stick when I attach pockets. If you like to use a glue stick as well, just make sure you let it dry before you run it through your machine. But you can of course also use pens. So first we are going to pin or glue the top folded edge, the outside edges, and then also the that outside edge except for where it is top stitched. So go ahead and pin that really well. Make sure that none of the lining is peeking out. This is why I like to use the glue stick, because you can really manipulate those corners quite a bit. So once again, at the top edge, you're just pinning or gluing down the inside folded edge of the lining. Yes, I should also mention that you are attaching these according to the dots that were on your front pattern piece. Now, once you're happy with that placement, you are going to edge stitch that top folded edge, pulling the rest of the pocket away as close into the corners as you can. You might not be able to get quite into the corners, and that's okay, because there will be some extra top stitching with the rest of the pocket that will take care of that. But just kind of pull the rest away and get as close into the corners as you can, just edge stitching as close as you can to that top folded edge line. And next we're going to do the next of the top stitching for the pocket. So starting about 3/4 of an inch down from the top edge, you're going to sew at an angle to create a little triangle at the top corner. Then you're going to sew down and around and up to that bottom notch, backstitch there, start again at that top notch, and then do another triangle. Just to reiterate, you are stitching about 1/8 of an inch in from the edge of your pocket. And then you're also going to sew a small bar tack at each of those notches, so the top and the bottom of that pocket opening. Okay, and this is how your pocket should look now. So there's that side entry and also the top entry. These are separate pocket pieces. And let's go ahead and move on to the pocket flap. So you are going to need your main pocket flap and then also your pocket flap lining with right sides together. You are going to pin them together, and then you're going to stitch along the side and bottom edges at a normal 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then you're going to trim down those seam allowances, especially at the corners, depending on how thick your fabric is, depends on how much you might need to trim that. And then go ahead and turn that right side out, making sure that you get really nice corners and give it a good press. And then you are going to top stitch those side and bottom edges, this time at 1/4 inch from the edge. Okay, now to attach our pocket flap. So take your front piece, and the pocket flap is going to be centered over the main pocket. Note that the pocket flap is slightly wider. That is intentional, so just center it above it. And then you are going to place it with right sides touching, and so that the bottom raw edge of the pocket flap is a 1/2 inch above the main pocket. And then we are going to go over to our sewing machine and we will stitch the bottom edge at a normal 1/2 inch seam allowance. If you want, it might be nice to go ahead and mark this first, as it's a little bit hard to know where that 1/2 inch is when you're in the middle of a pattern piece. Go ahead and back stitch at both ends as well. Okay, now that that is attached, we are going to trim those seam allowances way down to about 1/8 of an inch. And then we will take our pocket flap and we will press it down over those seam allowances. Give that a good press first, and then go over to your sewing machine and you're going to stitch 1/4 of an inch down from the fold, and so that should encase that 1/8 of an inch seam allowance in that stitching. Okay, and this is what it should look like. We once again did the right pocket here, but make sure that you do all of these steps for the left pocket as well. And now we can move on. Okay, now we're going to jump into the main jacket assembly. This is for both views. So with right sides touching, you're going to pin the upper back to the lower back. And then once that is pinned, we'll go over to our sewing machine and we will stitch that at a normal 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then if you need to, you can trim down those seam allowances or grade them. But either way, you are then going to press those seam allowances up, and then you are going to edge stitch a 1/4 of an inch in from that seam into the upper back. Okay, this is what it should look like. Now you're going to take each of your fronts and you are going to line up the shoulder seams with right sides touching, pin those, go over to your sewing machine and stitch those at a normal 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, should look like this. If you need to grade those seam allowances, you can do that now. If not, take those seam allowances and press them towards your back, and then we will edge stitch 1/4 of an inch into the back, catching those seam allowances underneath. Okay, should look like this. Let's just keep moving along and grab your sleeve pieces. So with right sides touching, you're going to pin each undersleeve to its coordinating top sleeve. And then just like other pattern pieces, we will stitch this at a normal 1/2 inch seam allowance. If you want to, you can grade this seam. I actually do like to do this on this seam in particular just because there's a lot of movement in this sleeve, so I don't like any extra bulk here. And then you are going to press those seam allowances towards the top sleeve, and then we will go to our sewing machine and we will edge stitch 1/4 of an inch into that top sleeve, catching those seam allowances in your line of stitching. Okay, this is what it should look like. Make sure you do everything you did for one sleeve for the other sleeve, and now let's attach those sleeves to the main jacket. So with right sides touching, we're going to pin each sleeve to its coordinating sleeve opening, match the front and back notches, and then that middle notch to the shoulder seam. The seams and the top stitching of the sleeve and the back should also line up. So go ahead and pin that really carefully. I know it's a little bit hard to put two opposite curves together, but the more you pin, the easier it's going to be to sew. So go over to your sewing machine and sew this at a normal 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now, once this is sewn, you can grade or trim down your seams if you want to. Then you are going to press those seams towards the main jacket and away from the sleeve. And then just like before, we're going to go over to our sewing machine and we are going to stitch through all layers into the jacket by 1/4 of an inch from the seam, catching those seam allowances underneath. Now, of course, do this for both sleeves, and this is what it should look like when it is done. Okay, let's sew up the side seams. So with right sides touching, you're gonna line up the side and the under sleeve edges. Of course, match up those seams and the notches. Once you have that pinned, you're going to go over to your sewing machine and you are going to stitch each of those underarm seams in one continuous line of stitching. Okay, and this is what it should look like when we are done with that stitching. Almost done here for today. So the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to press all of those seam allowances open. Okay, and that is it for today. Go ahead and turn your main jacket right side out and you should have the beginnings of a jacket. Come back tomorrow and we're going to jump into the lining and the bands and the wristbands. It's really all starting to come together.